Welcome to the Economy of the Universe. I'm Leon Clark. This episode will deal with populism and elitism and then apply these ideas to Brexit. The central question at the heart of this debate is who should have political power. Populism is the idea that political decisions should be made by the people, essentially majority rule. The decisions of the people are inherently righteous and should be followed blindly. Elitism is the idea that people are unable to govern themselves and instead ought to be ruled by a different class of men who are altogether wiser and able to govern others. Both of these are fundamentally flawed. Populism's problem arises from the tendency of emotions to dictate policy and lead to mob rule. James Madison in Federalist 63 pointed out how populism in Athens led to, quote, decreeing to the same citizens the hemlock on one day and statues on the next, end quote. This was a reference to the decision of the people of Athens to sentence Socrates to death by poison and then to erect statues in his honor when they came to regret their decision. A society governed by the will of the people will have no consideration of costs and consequences. It is government by passion, devoid of reason. In an age where everyone has access to social media and the outrage it fuels, yet few have even a basic understanding of history, civics, or economics, populism is a disastrous answer to the question of where power should reside. The contradiction of elitism lies in the idea that people are incapable of self-governing. Yet from the people springs a legislative class, a set of people who are all wise and free from the emotions and corruption that affect us all. Elitism fails because the legislative class are just as corrupt and foolish as everyone else, and are incapable of running the lives of the citizenry. Elitism leads to such spectacles as we saw in the Soviet Union and Communist China, where tens of millions of human beings died because central planners in some cases made mistakes and in other cases purposely carried out evil. To quote the father of modern economics, Adam Smith, the statesman who should attempt to direct private people in what manner they ought to employ their capitals would not only load himself with a most unnecessary attention, but assume an authority which could safely be trusted not only to no single person, but to no council or senate whatever, and which would nowhere be so dangerous as in the hands of a man who had folly and presumption enough to fancy himself fit to exercise it. Smith was saying that not only is central planning unnecessary, but it creates a degree of power which no one can be trusted with, least of all those who advocate for it. Just as Socrates was the wisest because he knew that he knew nothing, perhaps those who can be trusted with any degree of power are those who know that they are unfit to have it. Both populism and elitism are bad solutions to the problem of power and where it should lie. They are two sides to the same coin. Luckily, the idea that we must choose either populism or elitism is a false dichotomy. There is a third way. The proper answer to the question of who should exercise power is no one. No human being or set of human beings can be trusted with full governmental power. As James Madison pointed out in Federalist 51, quote, what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature, end quote. And Lord Acton pointed out one of the great truths of history, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Insofar as power must be exercised, it must always be limited, deliberate, and decentralized. Power must be contained with rigid boundaries, because power always seeks to grow and self-perpetuate. So how does this all tie in with Brexit? While I fervently support Brexit, I am the first to acknowledge that referendums are ridiculous. They are an excellent example of populism, the decision of people making a binary choice with little deliberation and many people voting without enough information, with the resulting decision called the will of the people and therefore untouchable, immaculate and perfect. Referendums are an awful way to govern society, yet the clamour from those who wish to remain in the EU is to have another referendum. There exists, however, a foundational difference in the legitimacy of a decision to reject a government and the decision to subject others to a government to which they do not consent. To quote the great poet John Milton, quote, is it just or reasonable that most voices against the main end of government should enslave the less number that would be free? More just it is, doubtless, if it came to force, that a less number compel a greater number to retain, which can be no wrong to them, their liberty, than that a greater number, for the pleasure of their baseness, compel a less, most injuriously, to be their fellow slaves. They who seek nothing but their own just liberty have always the right to win it, whenever they have the power, be the voices never so numerous that oppose it. On the other hand, elitism is also closely tied with Brexit. Britain is part of the European Union, an elitist body, where we have little power and most decisions are made by people that we did not elect, who exercise power over people they don't know and for whom at best they don't care and at worst they despise. Personally, I see no need to subsidize the lavish lifestyles of bureaucrats over whom I have no power, but who have immense power over me. What can I possibly gain from this relationship? Do I really require a bureaucrat in a foreign country in my life? I find it hard to even imagine how an EU bureaucrat can do anything useful for me except for resigning. The defenders of the European Union often point to free trade, but it always puzzles me why a political body is necessary for free trade. Isn't the definition of free trade a trade in the absence of politicians? Moreover, giving power to third parties who are exempt from the consequences of their decisions is a dangerous game. This is especially true when it involves the subversion of national sovereignty to the whims and experiments of politicians and bureaucrats who do not suffer when they make a mistake. Besides, are we to believe that if we were to remain in the EU, it would in any way shrink in size and scope? Have you heard of any governmental body ever decreasing in power? Why should we expect the EU to get better and not worse? We often hear of the potential problems that may arise when we leave the EU, but we almost never hear of an affirmative case for the good the EU does. I believe the argument for remaining is wholly an argument against leaving, rather than a positive argument over the benefits of the EU. I don't think that leaving the European Union will suddenly present a golden age for the United Kingdom. One look at the British Parliament is enough to convince me of that, nor do I believe there will be a huge catastrophe either. However, I do believe that there is nothing to be gained from a continued subjection to an elitist political union. I contend that the politicians, bureaucrats, and judges in Brussels have no care for the people they govern, but merely require them for their social experimentation and for the subsidization of their luxurious lifestyles and the perpetuation of their powerful positions. That's my opinion. But even if I were wrong, even if they had a genuine care and concern for their subjects, it would be wholly irrelevant. They are fundamentally unable to govern us better than we can govern ourselves. Their capacity for good is essentially non-existent, and their capacity for evil is great, regardless of their motives. For these reasons, among others, I, along with millions of Britons, have stated that we no longer consent to the government of the European Union. To apply the words of Thomas Jefferson to the situation today, quote, "A union whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people." End quote. Thank you. I haven't yet decided what the next episode will be about, but I plan to put up a poll on Twitter with a few options and you can vote. This doesn't mean that I like populism though. If you have any thoughts, ideas, or suggestions, feel free to email me at theeconomyoftheuniverse@gmail.com. If you're liking the channel, please subscribe and pass it on to friends. Thank you.